Hello everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and this is going to be my in-depth review of Total War 3 Kingdoms. So, full disclosure, I am not funded by CA or sponsored by them in any way. I did not have early access to this. And that's partially why I've taken about a week or so here to just really play through the game. I've put probably about 30 hours on the game so far, trying out some different stuff, running through some trial runs of some different campaigns, just so I could get a good sense of the game, so I could come in and give you some really high-quality review with some in-depth commentary that'll make sense. And then I am going to release a Bandit Queen campaign at some point. I've been trying to work my way through that. And I've got maybe 5 episodes on the current run of the Bandit Queen, and so I'll probably start releasing that over the next few days once I make sure that I'm in a pretty decent spot. Because it's hard to tell if you're like in a decent spot in the campaign or not if you haven't played it a lot, and I just want to make sure that I'm not going to get blown out in like 7 episodes or something, which has happened in a couple of those trial runs from just random stuff going on. But anyways, let's go ahead and we're going to review this really quick. So I'm breaking this down into 3 different parts. I'm going to talk about the armies, I'm going to talk about the politics and the tech, then I'm going to talk about the city and kind of the city management. And I've got this Google Doc. If you want to access this, you can look in the description if you just kind of want the TLDR version. Also have some timestamps as well. And then I'm going to open up the game and show you some of the things that we're talking about. So I'm just going to go ahead and move this over. The overall verdict, though, just coming in, just so you kind of know what to expect. I don't think this is very great for a Total War game. I think it's definitely way worse than Total War Warhammer, and I think it's even worse than Attila, and we'll talk about why in a little bit. I know a lot of people did not like Attila. I actually thought Attila is the Western Roman Empire. I thought that was actually pretty fun. I thought there were a lot of interesting systems in there. But I'm going to be comparing it mostly to Warhammer and Attila, because those are the most recent Warhammer games. I don't count Thrones of Britannia. That was a complete disaster. But we'll compare it to those two and sort of talk about what the changes are and what's good or bad. There are some good things in Three Kingdoms. I'd recommend picking it up, trying it out still. If you like Total War, you like to support the company, which I do, then, definitely give it a try. Maybe wait for it to be on sale if you're not in a super rush. But it's got some interesting stuff out there. And my perspective also is I am, a fairly top-end player. I do stuff on Legendary. I like the challenge. I like to do stuff that's interesting for people to watch as much as possible. So replayability is very important to me as a content creator. And so that's kind of my lens that I'm coming through. But if you're a more casual player that likes the style of play that this game encourages, which we'll talk about that here in a second, then you might really like the game. So, just keep that in mind. So I'll point out some good stuff, and I'll point out some not so good stuff as we go through. But I'm going to go ahead and pop that over there, and then we'll pop up the game here so I can show you what I'm talking about. But I've got that Google Doc on my second monitor over there. Okay. So let's start off talking about the armies here. And this is a campaign, like I said. I don't know how many turns in I am. It's summer. Oh, turn 35 here with the Bandit Queen campaign. And this one's interesting. It is a huge map overall, so there's a lot of stuff that you could potentially take over. Bandit Queen is pretty much everybody hates you for the most part, so you're constantly getting backdoored and attacked, which is really frustrating with some of the city management stuff we're going to talk about, like your super weak garrisons and lack of walls in most of your towns, and just like the payoff for having all this property is pretty crazy. I mean, at one point I had a lot of this before this dude started backdooring me and this guy burned this town, and I only had like my taxation is only 673 taxes right now. So, and it was a little bit more than that. It was probably close to 800, but I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I had like 12 towns at one point, and I was only getting like 800 gold taxation from those towns, which is absurd. That's less than 100 gold a town. So we'll talk about that with the towns, which is the third thing we're going to get to. But let's start with the armies as much as possible. So they did some innovations here, which are interesting conceptually. So basically you can have a general, and they call these retinues. You can have up to 6 units per retinue. And then you can combine up to 3 retinues into one army. So basically you can have up to 21 units in a full stack army. But you can also break them off as little mini armies like this guy, where he's just a standalone 6 stack with a general. So you can send him off and try to, pick up some smaller towns and things like that if you want to, or use him as reinforcing. I like that they made this bar really big too, so you can kind of just get a sense of how strong someone is. But this is how many units they have in their roster. I don't think it reflects their overall strength in terms of like if they have a whole bunch of really high tier units or low tier units, just how much of their maximum capacity of 21 units do they have. And then you can kind of see it's a little grayed out in part of it, and that's because I'm replenishing part of this. So that means that, you know, I'm not quite at full power if you look at this. Versus this guy, it's not grayed out, it's just black because he only has one roster there. So overall, that's kind of a neat concept. I don't mind that. It makes your armies a little more modular. One thing that is really annoying that I wanted to mention right off the bat is they brought this in from Thrones of Britannia, and that is the mustering system. So whenever you hire a unit, now these are already full, so I can't hire them right now, but if I wanted to recruit some units, they would come in at really, really low health, and then over time they will replenish up to full health. But if you ever move, you lose the mustering bonus, and you only use your replenishment, and the replenishment is really slow. Like, I have a lot of replenishment right now. You know, we have 30% casualty replenishment right now, and it's going to take this unit that's like maybe half health or so, it's going to take them relatively 3 turns to replenish all the way up to full. So the replenishment is way lower. If you have 30% replenishment in Warhammer, your army is going to be up like that, because I think it has something to do with the baseline replenishment, what that 30% is based on. But either way, like, you have to get a lot of replenishment in this game. It is imperative 100% that you rush replenishment as fast as you possibly can if you intend on fighting, because it just takes forever. And even like when you hire units, like I said, they don't come in full health. They come in with a mustering bonus, so they, you know, grow a little bit more, but then they also have to have that replenishment. So one of her faction traits, if we have that over here, is that she gives -1 mustering turns. And I have upgraded to get -2 mustering turns and an additional -2 from 2 different techs. So we have -5 total mustering turns. So usually it would take an army to go to full strength. It would take them like 7 or 8 turns of sitting perfectly still without replenishment to muster all the way up. If you have replenishment, it might be 5 or 6 turns. Even with all of these mustering bonuses, when I got this secondary army over here, it still took like 3 turns to muster up. So even with all of these crazy bonuses, you still have to sit there and recruit everything for 3 turns, which is really frustrating. Because it encourages like just a campy playstyle where you're just sitting there doing nothing, like just, you know, AFK watching Netflix on your second monitor or on your phone or something like that, and just pressing end turn over and over again. And I feel like that happens a lot in this game, where you're just waiting around on stuff most of the time. You're waiting around on mustering, you're waiting around on your buildings, you're waiting around on sieges. Just a lot of waiting. And so that can be pretty frustrating for me. So I think it encourages a stagnant playstyle and a really safe playstyle, because if your units ever get really damaged, you know that it's going to take you forever to replenish them back up. And so you're going to have to sit there and wait multiple turns for your units to replenish back up before you can go fight another large battle. So I understand that there should be consequences for losing units. I totally get that. And, you know, I know that replenishment is powerful, but, like, you know, there should be some counterplay to that. The counterplay would be, you know, in something like Warhammer, if you don't stop and replenish, your units are eventually going to die, and you're going to have to pay a higher price to hire them all back, and you're going to have to go back to a specific town if you lose one of your elite units. So if you lose your great swords, you're going to have to go back to a high-tier town to recruit those great swords again. Or you're going to have a general hire those for you, another general, and walk them over to you and hand them off. All that's going to cost you a lot of gold, but it doesn't completely derail your entire army. You could still go into battle, you know, do a really dicey fight that's risky, take a lot of casualties, and then, you know, spend a lot of gold that you earned from that fight to rehire your units if you don't want to wait on the replenishment. There's no way around that now. You're always waiting on replenishment. Even if you hire new units, you're waiting on replenishment, and it costs a lot of gold. You can't hand off units either. That's another thing that I had on here. Like, I can't hand off some archers from this guy over to her. I can't hand off any spearmen over to here. I have to hire them fresh. So you can't even, like, hire a general just to sit in your town and hire some units and then come back and hand them off to your main army. You have to sit with your main army and wait for that replenishment. There's no way around it. You can't hire new units with that army, and you can't have new units transported over to you with another army. So just forces you to wait, which is really annoying. And it also you can recruit units anytime, anywhere. So, for example, I don't think it's going to show me with her what I could recruit in theory. Here it'll show you, though, if we go to military. These are what are currently in there. And I can hire, like, any of these units anywhere, anytime. I don't have to have specific, like, military buildings in my towns. We'll get to the towns later. But you can just hire anything, anytime, anywhere. Like, her, turn 2, just hired a bunch of crossbows. Just completely obliterated everything. For 90 gold a pop. As you can see, most of these are like level 9 or level 10 units. Didn't have to have anything special to recruit archers or crossbowmen. You can even get some really high tier stuff like her specialty units. These like double axe things. You can hire those pretty early on. Some units are unlocked through the tech tree, which we'll talk about here in a second, which does look really cool, but it's not quite as cool as it seems. So you can unlock units, like right here, if it has a little white unit next to it, you can unlock these. Saber cavalry, which are okay, but like some of these top end units, like, you know, these light axes, they're all right, but like they're not appreciably much better than the tier 1 units a lot of the time. So you're teching up, you're like, man, I'm gonna get this awesome unit, you know, like I'm gonna get a cool giant or a cool dragon or something from Warhammer. It's like, no, you're just gonna get like a reskinned glaive unit here that like its stats are marginally better. Doesn't have any cool special abilities. It's just more expensive and marginally a little bit better. But the rate that you're paying for it, you know, something like these axes here are what they have: 30 attack speed, which we'll talk about the stats here in a second. They do 20 armor piercing damage. They have 40% evasion, 12 armor, and 60 missile block for 240, right? Versus, I don't even think we have any normal axes left on any of these guys. Those are kind of elite axes. We can look at these mounted militia or whatever. They're 138, so they're probably like 160 normally. These militia halberds, horses. So they have 23 armor piercing damage, 50k health, low on the armor overall. But if we look at the tech tree here, I think there's more skirmisher cabs somewhere. There's a pretty big cab down here that's like 300, and this one is pretty good overall. These heavy spear cav. They don't do that much more damage, if you notice. They only do 26 damage instead of 23. They have the exact same amount of health. They have some melee defense, but they have a lot of armor, and they do have shield block. But they're 315. They're like twice as much as the other ones. So it's like, yeah, you do get some, you know, you get some armor and stuff for it, but it's just nothing that's like, wow, you know, this is going to be amazing. So unit progression just feels bad because a lot of the units you're going to be using throughout the whole game are going to be units you can start with level 1 and just hire them in there. And, you know, since you don't have to have special buildings in towns, then there's not like a real sense of like a place where you need to hire this unit. Like, oh man, I really need to protect this province because it has the place where I hire these elite swords, where I hire these elite spears. You know, I've already invested so much time to level this up, and I really want to hire those units, so I want to protect that. And that happens in Attila, and that happens in Total War Warhammer. But here it doesn't. You just hire anything, anytime, anywhere. And you have to sit around for 5 turns and wait on it. So it just kind of feels bad where like almost every town is super modular. It doesn't matter which town you pick. They're all the same thing. You do get a small little resource, which we'll talk about later. But pretty much any town, they're all going to have the same building options for the most part. Like every single town on the map. I don't think there are any landmark towns. And there's really like no tension between having to hire for military or having to get growth or having to get money or whatever. Because there is no military. You can just always get the military anytime you want. It's like you have global recruitment everywhere, always, that you just have to wait on. Another thing is each one of these generals heavily specializes in a certain kind of unit. And it's color-coded for you, so it's like super simplified. Like, oh, it's a champion. It's her. Okay, she specializes in spears. And she's got some skills, which we'll talk about here in a second, that give you bonuses to spears, like this 10% armor for spears. So you want to buy a bunch of spears and put them in her army. And like she specializes in archers. Okay, she gets different buffs for archers, which is cool. But you want to do like, you know, all archers. It's kind of cool that they do upgrade their face a little bit, their facial expression based on how happy they are. So she's super happy with us right now. He's not so happy. He's kind of indifferent. And then she's feeling pretty good. So that is a nice touch visually. Like you want to have all your archers in these units because they get all these crazy bonuses to the archers. You want to have all your spears here. So it's very linear. It's like, okay, all archers. Anytime you hire these, all archers, all spears. So you can't really mix it up that much. Or you can, but it's going to be really inefficient. So that's kind of cool, but it's kind of a feels bad, too, if you do want something that's, you know, a little bit more diverse in your army tactics, or you need to adjust to a certain situation, right? Maybe you need to break her off and have her go fight a smaller squad while you have these two go do something else. Well, she's not going to be ready for that because she only has like one piece of an army that was intended to be all played together. So that's something that is a little bit on the frustrating side. Another thing is you can't swap generals. So I already said you can't swap units between, I think I said that. If I didn't, that's really annoying too, that you can't ferry in units. But you also can't swap out generals. So if I want to swap this dude out, if I want to say swap the selected retinue, I have to pick another general for my list, and it allows me to swap the general, but I have to have a new retinue. So I can't keep this retinue, right? So I have to get rid of all these units. If I want to put in a different general, then this guy's taking all of his troops and just hanging out in the waiting room, basically. And this is very relevant if one of your units gets bad traits, which we'll talk about here in a second. So this guy right here, apparently everyone in my faction hates him. There was a notification here, trouble brewing, which this is super frustrating. We'll talk about here in a second, but he just randomly, like, my faction leader and my heir both hate him a lot, and so we got to get rid of him, because I don't know what happens, but bad things like happen if you leave someone around and your faction hates him. He might break off and try to start a civil war. They might get some bad traits like discouraged or something weird like that. I don't know. But you have to get rid of him. And so you would think, okay, well, no problem. I can just swap him out for someone else, just get him off the battlefield and use somebody else. But it's like, no, you can't do that because I can't swap him or I lose all these units. And they're very, very expensive. So I have to literally get into a fight here and go suicide him into the enemy line. I have to just run him into their towers, get him killed in combat, and then after combat, I can replace him with another general, and I keep the units. Because there's an option when you replace a general to keep the old retinue. So if I can suicide someone in battle and put another general in afterwards and keep the old retinue, why can't I just swap the general in the first place without killing them and keep the old retinue? I guess they really don't want to encourage that type of stuff because they don't want you to get around the replenishment mechanic, I guess, because you could just, in theory, I guess, have another general, like, hire all the units, sit in town, wait on the mustering, and then you could move your one general, like, out of an army out and then swap your main general into the fresh army that you just mustered. So they're trying really hard to get around the abuse cases with the new stuff, but you can abuse it like this. Like I just said, you could just hire a retinue like this, go suicide it into the enemy, potentially, with one of your armies. It's a little more work to do that, and then replace a general and put your main general in there with the fresh new units. So there's workarounds to it, but it's just goofy stuff like that that just doesn't really make a lot of sense. And, you know, they're really trying to push this replenishment penalty, but that's just really annoying. So let's talk about the traits here, since I just mentioned that, and that was next on my list also. You can just get these random events that just completely wreck you, potentially. So I'm in the hole 1,000 gold right now to try to field both of these armies, and I have to have an additional army because if I siege anywhere and they have a main force, you're going to be outnumbered, and there's just not a lot of tactical play that you can do during sieges to make up for low numbers most of the time. Like in Warhammer, you can make up with that. Like you have some generals that are good at certain things. You can crack walls with your heroes. You can use magic. You can use artillery or a major ranged advantage. You can use matchup advantages if you have a lot of regeneration as vampire counts or something. There's all kinds of things you can do to even the odds if you have a smaller army up against a larger army in a siege or something, if you're preparing it properly and using good tactics. With this, it's really just a numbers game because every faction has the exact same units, aside from like one or two special units you can get. So it's just like, okay, they have 24 people. I have, or you know, whatever, they have 4 battalions, so they have 28 units. I have 21 for my 3 battalions. They have their siege towers. They're probably going to win the fight, and there's not much I can do about that. So I had to hire this other guy for that. But this costs like 5,000 gold or something for this dude. If you try to hire, like, if we want to recruit somebody here, you know, these are a little bit cheaper. But that's because they only have 2 units with them. So, like, this dude right here would be 3,000 gold. And the upkeep would be 260 each. And they come in hurt, and I'd have to replenish all of them, including the general himself. This dude, because he came in with 6 units, was very expensive. He was like 5,000 gold. And it told me he was very happy when I hired him. I mean, he's got 68 happiness, which is really high. I mean, even someone like her, well, she doesn't have happiness because she's, or does she? Because she's the faction leader, so she doesn't matter. I mean, she's got 101 because she's the heir, but like this dude's all right. He's got 109. So I guess these guys are getting up there because we've won a ton of fights. And we're getting rivalries with hostile factions, all that stuff. But, like, that's pretty good. A lot of these generals that you try to bring in are much, much lower. Like, this guy's 7 leadership, right? This dude's 20. Why does it... That's got to be glitched. There's no way this dude's 109. Okay, yeah, he's not... He's 68. Okay, so it's glitched out. It's just showing me this guy's, even though I'm like hovering over these. Okay, here we go. So they're all like, sorry, I guess I zoned out there. I'm looking at this over here. So this is like, you know, 23, 27. Like this guy's gonna leave pretty soon. You know, there's a lot of people that are dissatisfied. So I picked this dude up. I'm like, all right, this guy's got 68. He likes a lot of stuff. He's fond of our faction. We saved him earlier. We could have executed him. We decided to save him. So he's fond of our faction. He has personal traits that are really nice. I mean, if we look at him here, he's intrepid, so he's brave, he's cunning, he's humble. He doesn't desire higher offices. He's satisfied. You know, like everything makes it look like this is a nice guy. Fondness for Zhang Yang, or whatever name is. Sorry, I'm going to butcher some of the names in here. But fondness for these people. And all of a sudden, we've got these crazy bitter rivalries. Like there was one last turn with the faction leader where he's just having all this trouble, like within 3 turns of when I hired him. And so now I immediately have to get rid of him. So I just wasted 5,000 gold. I can't hire these units. I can't switch out the revenue unless I suicide him, which I'm gonna do, into there. And there's no counterplay to that. I didn't do anything that would make him, like them not like him. There wasn't a political event where I chose the wrong answer. We didn't lose battles together. Like their traits seem compatible. As far as I can tell. So there's nothing that I've done that, like, logically would make them hate him. As far as I could tell, you know? And then there was another one. Like, right before this guy, I hired another, like, new general who had, like, pretty high satisfaction with us. We had compatible traits. I looked at it. Everyone was smiling. It's all good. He had some really nice qualities. Like, he was a spear general. So he was the green one, and he got 15% off of all the units in his retinue. He came with an entire 6 stack of these spears, which are some of the best mid-game units you can get, because spears are really OP. We'll talk about those in a little bit. So it was great. I was like, awesome. He's got awesome traits. He gets along with my generals. He's got some of the best units in the mid-game. It's going to be awesome at sieging. Let's go. So got him, spent the turns hiring him up, sat around in a town, waited for 4 turns, paid thousands of gold in upkeep, paid 4,000 to 5,000 gold straight up to hire him. Got over here, before we even had one battle with him, he had a superstitious dream as part of an event and got negative 50, happiness with the people. It was negative 50 for 10 turns. He leaves immediately the next turn. I lose all of those units. Like, before I could do anything, he has a superstitious dream, done. And I lose everything. So I just lost like 8,000 gold. I'm not rich. When I started trying to hire these clowns, I had like 24,000 gold that I've worked up over 35 turns of like non-stop fighting and wins. Like I've probably won 40 battles at this point in 35 turns. Like I don't even think that's much of an exaggeration. And all I had to show for it was 25,000 gold, and in 2 turns, just trying to hire one little secondary army. Because of these random events, like half of my gold is squandered. Like I spent 35 to 40 turns working this up, and half of it's gone in like 5 turns or less because of random events. It's infuriating. I'm like just losing my mind off of that when that happened. So that's really, really sucks. And if you have rivalries like that, you just have to get rid of this guy. He's eventually either he's going to leave or my faction heir is going to leave, or they're going to get bad traits. Like something really bad's going to happen. Because you start the campaign with the purple, there's like this purple dude that your faction hates also, and then he just leaves out of nowhere usually if you don't dismiss him. And so that's why I'm saying I have to get him killed and replace him so I get to keep these units before he leaves and walks with all those units, like what just happened to me a second ago, or a couple of turns ago. So that's super frustrating. As far as like the skills go of generals, I talked about how some of them specialize in things, which is kind of cool, but a lot of these skills are just pretty inconsequential. Like they just don't matter that much, and there's a lot of overlap, so certain generals will have like certain skills will be shared among many different generals. So like patience is kind of cool, you get some extra resolve. Most of these stats that you get don't matter either. Like resolve gives you health, that's a pretty good one. Cunning is very good because that gives you ammo, so that's very good for the blue ones. Instinct, you get a little bit more damage, that's nice. Authority, it's good if you're the faction leader because you get satisfaction, but your morale, you get +5 morale. But I have 64 authority right now. That's a lot of stats. That's a lot of authority. And I'm only getting 5 unit morale. You know, she has 124 instinct. And she's only getting 27% melee damage and 7% recruitment. Like, the payoff for this stuff is so low. Cunning is really good. 20% extra ammo for only 65 cunning is actually quite good. But the rest of this stuff's kind of goofy. Resolve's pretty good. 70%. But look, I have like 17 expertise here. No benefit whatsoever. So the stats are a little wonky. Some of these are pretty good. You know, like this, getting 25% campaign movement range. That's actually quite strong. A little bit of battle speed. Now, +10 morale, that's only for you. That's not for your entire retinue. Same thing right here. So some of this is okay, but some of it's kind of generic, like stuff you wouldn't really care about that much. And the thing that gets me is a lot of it is shared. So you see a lot of similar stuff, like patience right here. Literally the same thing as this skill. And you'll notice that a lot, that there is some overlap between different types of generals. So like, why is this not all blue? Why are there some like green things in here? I don't know. But she does have, like, you have to have the archers with her because they can get fire arrows and night battles, which are really good. And then she gets like 20% damage, so like 10% firing rate and 10% armor piercing damage, and then 25% range damage here. So you have to have both of those. So it's really linear. There are very obvious choices you have to get. The rest of the stuff is kind of weak, and there's a lot of overlap between other factions. Now, there might be some differences depending on the faction and thing like that, but as far as I can tell, even the legendary lords here, the legendary champion, I don't think they have unique things here. I think that's all the same stuff as a normal champion you could hire, which is pretty disappointing. So it's okay. It's just like super generic. Like in Warhammer, you know, you get to choose, right? You're like, okay, this is like real choices. How far do I go in the army tree, in the red tree? Like which kinds of units do I want to buff up? Or do I want to go down into the blue tree and get lightning strike and like upkeep reduction? Like that's really important, especially on legendary. And then there's all these like special, like they've done a good job of adding in more stuff over time where it's like you get special talents that are unique to specific lords, especially the legendary lords. Like you can upgrade certain kinds of units, or you get certain kinds of abilities that really stand out and make you different. You can go on quests to get these legendary items that are really cool. Like they've done a really good job of, like, almost every legendary lord feels very distinct. They have certain units they specialize in, certain skills they do, certain combat tactics that they excel in. So that makes them feel fun, it makes them feel unique. Here, everything's just all the same. It doesn't matter if it's your legendary champion, faction leader, or just some random champion that you hired. It's all the same. Like, yeah, she's got some unique weapons here that give her immunity to fatigue, and she's got some, you know, good stuff there. She's got some good armor. So, you know, she's got some, like, unique weapons that are okay, but they're just stats. They don't really change your playstyle at all. And she's got, like, a couple of, like, traits here, right, as the Bandit Queen and things like that. So there's a couple of things, but it's just not really felt, and it doesn't change the way that you play the game at all. And there's not really any choice. It's super linear. Like, you have to get the spear stuff if you're getting her, right? You have to get the archery stuff if you're getting the blue people. So that can feel kind of rough. And there's severe imbalance between champions that I mentioned earlier, in that the champions or in the lords or whatever, the generals, the champions are way, way stronger than anything else you can get out there. Like, it's like laughably. Now, yes, she is over the top, like really strong, right? She does 67 armor-piercing damage here. This is on records mode, by the way. She has 67 armor-piercing damage and has 93,000 health on her unit and 55% armor. Let's compare that to the blue person here. 18,000 health, does 9 damage. 9. Very little of this has to do with level as well. Like, you do get some stat power-ups whenever you level. But even if she was level 1, like if this person was level 10 and this person was level 1, this person, like, would completely wipe them up. Especially, like, even other champions. Like, if we look at, like, hire a new army here, right? If we wanted to raise a new army, if we look at, or actually, can we look at our court? I don't know if this guy's in our court or not. Characters. We don't have another champion here. We might be able to look at this guy here. Yeah, okay, so we can look at this champion. So this isn't even the legendary lord, but you can see that it's still going to be way, way stronger than blue. 55,000 health, 25 armor-piercing damage, 63% armor. Just like insanely stronger than even the faction heir. Right? Once again, like, just laughable numbers. Now, if you're playing on romance mode, this person, like the blue one, does have, like, basically spells they can cast and things like that, which is okay. It's just really hard to balance romance mode. We'll talk about that more here in just a second, but just at least in records mode, these are completely worthless. Like, I actually bring them in and just AFK them in the fight. I don't even send them in because your general can randomly die, which we'll talk about here in a second. In fights as well. So I just literally sit them at the back of the fight and they just sit there and watch. And you're like, well, why hire them in general? Because you have to if you want archers, because they give light or night battles, which is really important. They give you this extra, like, basically 20% range damage here, and this also gives you 25% range damage. So your archers basically do 45% more damage with them. And you get night battles, which basically lower the enemy morale by 15 and allow you to lightning strike them where they don't get reinforcements. Like, it's really, really important. You have to have them, but they're so terrible in combat. So it's a trade-off, but it's just, it feels bad when you have a unit on the battlefield that literally just sits there and does nothing. In Total War Warhammer, sometimes that happens with some of your mages, but I don't know. I guess that's okay, but it just feels really bad. Just a lot of imbalance there. And the champions beat up all the other ones too. The red guys are okay in combat. As you can see when I hover this guy, he's got, you know, 60,000 health, does 26 damage, so they can kind of hang, but like the blue and the yellows are just terrible. So I don't know, the balance feels a little off there. And we'll talk about just the random deaths as well. When you're in records mode, it doesn't matter how much health your battalion has, they can just randomly die. So I've tried in a campaign before where I sent her out to try to flank around and just kill these archers that were in a siege. He just randomly got sniped by like an archer tower at like 30% health. She just died. And that was it. It's done. You don't get her back. You know, she's gone. And you have to try to, you know, replace her with someone else. I was just doing a siege a few turns ago, and I sent her in hand-to-hand combat. She needed some help. You can pop them off of the horses, which is pretty cool in combat, and send them in to do sort of hand-to-hand melee combat. You might say, well, why would you do that? Because then they're no longer vulnerable to spears. The enemy just spams spears because they're OP much of the time. And she literally, like, out of the 53 units, there were 40 left, and she died in combat. I lost my crap. I was like cussing out. I thought the campaign was over, but then I figured out that she can actually get wounded as long as you win the fight. It seems like sometimes you can get wounded if you win the fight, and you will get your character back after a couple of turns. So they do have that. I think that might just be with the legendary lords. I don't know. I've never seen other people with that. So that's cool, I guess, that you're kind of protected in that way, but for your other lords, you're not. And it just seems so random. Like, I had over half of my unit health left. I had only lost probably 20% of the unit health, and she just randomly died or got wounded and left the battlefield. So I don't know. That just feels really, like, sketchy to me. I know Attila was kind of that way, but it didn't feel like you died that much in Attila. Usually I didn't even use the generals in Attila either, so that's kind of a knock against Attila in that way. But I think the combat system and the skill system is probably better than Attila. Attila, I'm trying to remember, I think it was just like you just had base stats. You know, like you had cunning and a couple other stats, and that was it. That you just try to buff up. You could put certain followers in your army, I think. Oh yeah, you had certain skills you could get, I'm remembering now, with, that would just give you stats, basically, as you leveled up and went down. So I still feel like there were even more choices in that. That wasn't that great. I think this is on par with that. I think it's similar. This looks better. It's got better colors and things, but I think it's on par with that. Now, you can get these little extra items, which are okay. The followers are kind of cool that you can switch in and out. Accessories are kind of cool. So, you know, this is interesting. It's probably on par with Attila in terms of this type of character management stuff. Attila, though, you could have wives, which we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. I thought that was maybe a little bit better in Attila, but either way, really uninspiring. Definitely a major step down from Warhammer. Maybe on par with Attila. It's really not that great. There's not a lot of choices there. Not a lot of real choices. And I think that generals have too much power in romance mode from what I've seen. Like, they have tried to dial it back a little bit, I think, but you can just run your general in there and they just completely obliterate, like, other battalions of units. Now, if they get swarmed by a bunch of units, yeah, they can die, but if you just mix them in with other units, you know, on the front line or whatever, they're probably a little bit too strong. And, like, some of those abilities are really OP if you use them correctly. Like, the blue person, like, lowers all armor and, like, resistances by, like, 100% for 50 seconds or something in combat. So if you use that and you have that, you're going to completely mow down the enemy. Like, it's just not even going to be close. So yeah, it's just like all the skills and stuff. It's kind of cool that you can do that in romance, but I feel like it's really imbalanced. And the duel system, like, I don't know, you can challenge people to duels, and if you're stronger, you win. If they don't want to duel you, they, like, lose a lot of morale and stuff. So it just feels like that mode is probably too easy. I haven't played a lot on that mode, and it feels like records mode is okay, but the random deaths are really frustrating. I guess the fact that your legendary lord can get that wound maybe balances that out, but they should at least, maybe they do eventually give that to your other lords if you get to a certain rank, or it should at least be a skill you can go towards where you get, like, +1 resiliency. I don't think there is one that's like that, but that would be cool if there was at least a skill you could get to, or a technology you could get, or something that would allow your lords to be wounded or something in combat instead of outright dying. Or just simple answer, your lord is always the very last person that dies in the battalion. That seems to happen to the enemy a lot. Like, they'll be running away with one horse and that's their lord or whatever, and they'll get away, they'll get off the screen. But see, like, these people hate him. Like, they don't like you do. None of them. None of my major ones like you do. These two don't. Even though it said he really liked her. Anyways, so I think that's kind of frustrating. Combat stats overall are pretty simplified. I just showed you a second ago. You've got your morale here, you have your total health, your charge bonus here, kind of similar to previous charge bonuses. It does damage on impact and gives you some bonuses for a little bit of time. I like how it shows you the melee attack rate. That's pretty cool. So this is how many attacks they do per minute, so you don't have to guess. In the past, you're just like, okay, it's halberds, they attack really slowly. Okay, it's a berserker, they attack quickly. But now it gives you an actual number, so that's cool. Splits up the normal damage and armor piercing damage. They got rid of melee attack and melee defense, which I think is kind of weird. Now it's just melee evasion, so there's no counterplay to the melee evasion. Like, the only thing you can do is charge into them, which will dodge a lot of it, or shoot them with arrows. But it makes some of these units almost impossible to kill that have, like, really high melee evasion and armor and shields. Like, some of the super top-end swords can be good, but a lot of the swords are pretty bad in general. But yeah, so there's not really a lot of counterplay to that, so that's just really weird why they would combine those. Then if you have a shield, it increases your melee evasion and your armor, which is kind of weird, but that's how that works. The shields are pretty good in general. Usually get a lot of value for those. And then your base armor, it tells you a percentage of damage you would take instead of giving you a value, and then you have to play, like, guess and check, like, try to figure out how much armor it has. So I think that's a lot easier to understand. It's going to block that percentage of damage, which is cool. Then you have a shield block chance as well. So, okay, I think it's probably a step up from Attila with the stats. Definitely a step down from Total War Warhammer. You know, in Warhammer, there are so many, like, other permutations that can go into this that are interesting. Like, there's physical resist, which is a good counter to armor-piercing damage. And then there's magical attacks, which counter physical resist. And then there's magic resistance, which can counter magical attacks. So there's just a lot more counterplay to different abilities. And then there's explicitly, it tells you anti-large. This is what this unit does to large units. And then there's anti-infantry, which is like this damage does bonus to infantry. Whereas in this game, it just tells you things like, hey, this is good against mounted. You know, but it doesn't tell you what that means. You know, if you hover over these things, it doesn't say, okay, you do 20 extra damage to, like, mounted stuff. So we don't know, like, do the spears do more than the halberds? This says good against mounted and anti-cavalry. So we don't know what that means. So I don't know. I think that's just a lack of clarity and a lack of counterplay. So I think it's definitely a step down from Warhammer, but probably a little more visibility than Attila. Okay. Unit matchups are very linear and imbalanced, they seem. Like, spears just seem like they're the best overall. Like, they're really, really strong for their cost. They're only 120 cost, have pretty good morale, but they do a lot of armor-piercing damage. So they do 23 damage here and 23 here. That's 46 damage overall. Half of it's armor-piercing. They have a decent swing rate of 22, and they have 20% evasion, 30% armor. And if you do the shielded ones, then they have 42% evasion and 37% armor and 45% block chance. So that means that they're taking, what, 37, like 42% less damage in combat. Overall, 42 from evasion and then 47 there. So that's like 89% of the damage is going to be reduced against other people in combat. So it's going to take forever to hack through them. And these have less damage, ironically, I guess because they're not two-handed holding spears. I guess they're spears instead of halberds. But they do a little bit less damage overall, but they can do some of these advanced formations and things. So that's just really strong. I don't know if I have any swords. I don't think I do. We've got some axes we can look at here. So compare them to these axes. So these do, and these are specialty units that you can only get with the faction I took him from. 185, so they're like 50% more gold. They attack 30 times per minute, so okay, definitely an upgrade there. They do 30% armor piercing. Okay, so that's good. Or 30 armor piercing overall. They have no reduction from armor whatsoever. They have no armor. They have no shield block. They have 42% dodge. So basically, they're getting 50% reduced damage in combat, 49%, versus the other ones were getting 90% reduced damage. And the damage is very similar. I mean, what was it, 23, 23? So that was 46 total damage. 30 of it is armor piercing. This is only 41 total damage. So this does definitely do a bit more damage, but it also takes way more damage and costs 50% more. Now, yeah, this has other stuff. It's disciplined, it scares, you know, guerrilla deployment. Like it's got some cool stuff to it. But this is a really advanced unit. You know, if you get a more advanced spear unit that we could get, like some of the stuff from the technology, it's going to be way stronger. So in general, spears are just really OP because they do a lot of damage in combat, a lot of armor-piercing damage, and they're extremely good against horses. So they hold up pretty well against swords overall and axes overall, and they destroy cavalry. So why would you not just run these? And they're very good against missile if you get them with the shield. So just spam all spears. I mean, yes, like the very top-end swords in an extremely long fight will probably beat the spears. Now, swords do almost no damage, though. I guess we could pull him up here. This guy probably has some. Look at him. Well, he's got axes. Oh, here we go. So here's their medium swords. Right, look at this. Okay, so 14 armor-piercing damage and only 19 other damage, right? So that's 33 total damage. They have 49 block and 36 armor and 45 shield block. So that's a total of, what, 80, let's see, 49 plus 36. Is that like 85? 85% damage mitigation. with 24 swing. Versus this is, or 84% damage mitigation. This is 89% mitigation. 45% block. So it's basically the same defense, even slightly better on defense. Has 24 swing rate, but also does 26 armor-piercing damage. So why would you ever get these? These do way, way less damage. Yeah, they swing like 6 more times per minute, but the damage is way lower. I mean, it's like, what, 33 total? This is 33, I guess, too, but it doesn't do the armor piercing. Now, these probably have a better charge bonus, 73 versus 29. So I guess if you're charging, but a lot of times with, like, infantry, you're not going to be charging that much. You're just going to be set up in, like, these infantry scrums. They have really low melee, like move speed, so it's really hard to get a lot of charges off with them. I guess these do have more health, so that's a big thing. They do have more health. So they would last, well, those were injured. Actually, that was just because those are injured. If they have the full amount, they have literally the same amount of health. So it's like, okay, you get a slightly bigger charge bonus, but you don't have the anti-cav. So basically, there's no point in having the swords, and you do less damage. I'm almost positive they do less damage over time because they don't do as much armor-piercing damage. So it's like you do less damage, you don't get any bonuses versus cav, you get a little bit more charge bonus. But why? Like, why go for these swords? So unless it's a specialty, like super top-end sword, like I think the Yellow Turbans have these, I can't pronounce it, like the Juxa or whatever, like these tier 3 swords that are really good. Unless it's something like that, you should just pretty much always get spears. And so it just comes down to spears are really overpowered in general because they destroy cav and they hold their own, or are possibly even better than both swords and axes, even in extended melee trades. And then archers are really strong, because now they can have these OP spears protecting them from the cavalry, because everyone can just spam spears, so that makes archers stronger. Then the archers just shoot down the spears, or they shoot down the swords or whatever, so that makes archers really OP too. So basically, I think the best combination is just going to be spears plus archers. Pretty much always, and you just ignore swords. You might want to get a couple of horses, maybe, but like she's already horse mounted, and she's going to be really strong. So yeah, maybe you throw in like a cavalry or two. But it's mostly just grab a crap load of archers and get some spears. Could they make an army comp to counter this? Like everything that's like, you know, like super tier 3 heavy-ended like swords with spears? Yeah, maybe they could do that. Cavalry obliterate swords though. That's another thing. When they charge in there, like the charge bonus on some of these things, like her, it's like 222. So it just completely deletes. If you ever watch her on records mode charge into a stack of swords, it just like instantly deletes them, like they're done. They all just like blow up on the spot, like 90% of their health just disappears off the charge. And, you know, some of these other cavalry are not going to be quite that powerful, but a lot of them, you know, are pretty dang strong. If you look at this guy, like this is 194 off the charge, and that's just a little dinky 145 cav. So the charge bonus on the cavalry is massive. So if you're just trying to field swords against these things will absolutely mow you over. So once again, you really need spears because of the cav. So I think the unit balance is just really far off. There's not a lot of counterplay to different units. There's not a lot of diversity. You just spam archers and spears. Maybe sprinkle in a couple of horses if you want to get spicy, and you're probably going to wreck everything. So I think that leaves quite a bit to be desired there. Yeah, high tier units not worth the cost, which is something that I mentioned before. It's like if you're ultra rich, yeah, you can get the top end stuff, but usually if we look at her here, like I can hire these heavy spears, but they're 225. Oh, those are the fists. Let's see. So these do 26 damage, 26 damage. So what am I buying for that? What am I buying for, you know, paying 50% more cost? It's literally the same health. Was it 30, 37? So 52 versus 47. So I'm getting 5 more armor. 29 versus 42. But I'm losing 42 or 29. So I'm losing 13 dodge, like melee defense, in exchange for getting 5 more armor and 5% more shield block. I'm losing 13 movement speed. I'm losing 4 swings per minute. Well, these are buffed. These might be a little different because they're going to be buffed up a little bit because they're in her army. But you see what I'm saying. You get the gist. Like, it's not worth it. Like, they're not 50% stronger at all than the medium spear. So those are going to be buffed up because they're currently in her army, and this is not showing me what the buffs would look like. So this would be, like, slightly stronger. And this is a higher rank, I think. Yeah, it's rank 4. So, you know, they're going to be a little bit better, probably, in some areas with the heavy spears. But not much. Not enough to justify a 50% cost. So you're highly encouraged, then, just to get all of the simple Tier 1 stuff. I mean, these only cost 60 upgrade. And if you watch fights with these completely obliterate the enemy. Because they do 24 piercing damage and 25 normal damage. 49 damage per shot. 200 range. 26 ammo. After all the upgrades. Like, they just completely mow down people, especially in sieges, like siege defense or siege offense. And if they're protected by spears, like, the enemy's just not going to get close to you. There's not any good artillery. You can get trebuchets sometimes, but they're very expensive. And so these archers just murder anything that doesn't have a shield. So, just pretty imbalanced overall stuff, I think. And then some certain lords are really imbalanced, too. Some legendary lords. Like, I know Yuan Shao is ridiculous. He gets 50% upkeep off of basically these captains you can get, which are like little mini generals that aren't specific characters. But he gets 50% off hiring those, and he gets 50% upkeep on those. Which means, effectively, he can just have one general and just hire 2 captains, which are basically the same thing as generals. They're just like a little, like, relatively elite fighter that can have up to 6 different units. You just can't, like, use them in court. You can't dismiss them, take them out of your army. You know, there's a couple of things you can't do with them. But if you just leave them there, they're basically like a real army. He gets 50% off of that. So what does that mean? That means he can basically have twice as many armies as you for the same cost. So that's, like, super OP. And there's some other factions that have some OP stuff going on as well. So I think she's fairly balanced. I think there's definitely way stronger stuff out there than her. But that's a thing, too. And then I think the final thing I'll say about military, and then we'll move on and talk about politics a little bit here. I don't want this video to be too long. How long are we going so far? 52 minutes. Okay, well, it is going to be super long. I'll move along a little bit faster here. Maybe I'll break this up into 2 parts. I don't know if it needs to be a 2-parter. Maybe I could. I probably should cover city and politics in the next one. So I'll break it up into 2 parts. I don't want it to be much longer than an hour. So sorry, I didn't realize I didn't have my timer up on the second screen here. I didn't realize how long that we've been going at this, but yeah, the sieges are pretty dull overall. There's not a lot of interactivity with the sieges. It's pretty much like you just kind of run at the gate and try to fight them. Like, you can hire sappers. It takes 2 turns to hire them, and they will blow a hole in one of the walls you can go through, but takes 2 turns. It's annoying. You can't really get up on the rafters at all. There are no siege towers as far as I can tell. You either just get sappers or a battering ram. So you're just always on the ground trying to run in through a narrow, you know, runway or whatever. It's like, yeah, you can attack from multiple angles if you want to, but usually that's pretty dumb because then you're just exposing yourself to more surface area of towers. Like, sometimes people give the AI a hard time. Well, why are they trying to fight with all these units through one choke point? It's like, if you divvy it up, if you try to come from multiple angles and they have a similar amount of units than you, you're just creating more surface area for those towers. And those towers do a lot of damage. So usually you're better off, if you can, just trying to run through one choke point. And once again, you're better off having a ton of archers because they can fire and get full benefit regardless of how small the choke point is. So if you were to try to run like a bunch of spears and swords, they would all get globbed up, you know, in the in the way that you're trying to break into their base, right? Either through the walls or through the gate. And they just wouldn't be effective. So once again, and horses are terrible in sieges, everybody knows that. So once again, you're highly encouraged to spam archers because that's one of the only things that you can do in sieges to get a major advantage, is just have more archers than they do. Because they're always going to be effective. So while all of their units are blobbing up near the door, you can just snipe down on them with your archers. So that's okay, but like, you know, in Warhammer, there are so many ways that you can do sieges, right? You can get your siege towers and try to get up on the walls. You can crack the walls with your heroes. You can use artillery to take out towers and walls. You can use some you can use some trebuchets, but they have really low ammo counts in this. You can just try to climb up the walls and fight them that way if you want. You can use flying units to try to harass them on the walls. You can use magic to help you out around major choke points. Like, there's so many different, like, interesting ways that you can interact with a siege in Total War Warhammer. In this one, it's literally you just walk up and just go through a narrow chokeway and just right-click the enemy and then just, like, go to the bathroom, make yourself a sandwich or something, and just hopefully your guys win. You know, it's like you can just be AFK in a lot of these fights. Like, you have to aim your archers every now and then, so you can be, like, watching Netflix on your phone, and then, you know, you're like, oh, okay, dude's running. All right, next target. Just right-click him. You know, feels like there's just really not much tactical diversity in a lot of things. Defending sieges are slightly better, but not really. You just put some spears, like, in front of the towers, and then, once again, you just focus fire your archers on their vulnerable units. Just focus their lords out. A lot of times their lords won't charge in. They won't dismount to come in and fight you on foot, and so they can't charge into those spears, so they just like to stand there a lot of times. You just snipe them with your archers. So, I don't know. A little underwhelming, but... Okay, I'll go ahead and end that here, and then I'll do politics and tech for the next section, and I'll make that one faster. I'll try to make that one 30 minutes or less. I know that, like, never happens on this channel, but I'll try to do 30 minutes or less for that one, so stay tuned. I'll have a little bit more. I'll kind of tell you what that's all about, and yeah, that's going to be it. If you enjoy this content, these kind of honest reviews, in-depth reviews, be sure to like and subscribe. It just takes a couple of clicks. It's free. It's easy. It helps out a ton. Check out the content on the channel. Like I said, I will do a campaign with Bandit Queen. It is interesting to kind of watch. We do get into some good battles here, even though I think it's a lot more underwhelming than Warhammer. And I do have a ton of Warhammer content on the channel as well that I'm constantly adding to. So be sure to check out some of those campaigns also. But anyways, that's going to be it. Thank you very much. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.